Evening. Let me continue with the last part of our table of specifications, or the TOS, particularly on the subject area plan implementation, legal aspects, and plan administration in environmental planning. This is equivalent to the overall 35%. So prior, we had the first subject area, which is environmental planning processes, comprising 45, then history and theory, which is equivalent to 20. And then lastly, we have 35% on plan implementation, legal aspects, and plan administration in environmental planning. So, we start with letter A, legal foundations of environmental planning, which is 42 is this 42%, number of items 63. So I proceed with the key milestones. Okay. Laws and rules and regulations on social economic planning. 10%, 15 items. So, okay. Then I need to read 1.1 now and interpret the social cultural applications of historical and cultural heritage laws and policies in environmental planning. So that's comprises point 67? One item. So yeah, what are those historical and cultural heritage laws? We have the National Cultural Heritage Act, which is RA 10066, to protect tangible and intangible assets of a country. So these laws influenced environmental planning by requiring planners to incorporate cultural preservation into development frameworks. We have a sample question like, which principle is best represented in the integration of cultural heritage into urban planning? So, for example, the choices are A, sustainable development, B, social equity, C, environmental efficiency, then D, cultural preservation. Since we're talking about historical and cultural heritage laws, the answer should be letter D. Yes, environmental, cultural preservation. So, okay. What about 1.2? Apply the policies and guidelines on housing project developments as prescribed by related housing laws. That's 2.67% for items. So, housing policies such as the UDHA, or the Urban Development Housing Act, RA 7279, focus on providing affordable housing while balancing urban expansion with environmental sustainability. So, if question is, for example, a housing developer plans to, because this is it application? So, a housing developer plans to create a subdivision in an urban area. So, which law would primarily govern the allocation of housing units for marginalized sectors? So, answer there is, as I mentioned earlier, we have RA 7279, which is the Urban Development and Housing Act. So, for 1.3, appraise local and regional plans on their harmonization with the medium-term Philippine Development Plan, comprising 3.33%, 5 items. So, regional plans must be or must align with national goals outlined in the Philippine Development Plan to ensure coherent socio-economic progress. So that's what it means in 1.3. For example, a question like which action best ensures that a regional development plan aligns with the medium-term Philippine Development Plan? So, for example, we have choices like A, conducting community workshops, or B, consulting stakeholders, C, synchronizing objectives with national goals, D, reviewing previous project evaluations. So obviously, answer is letter C, synchronizing objectives with national goals. So because we are harmonizing it with the local and regional plans should be harmonized with the medium-term Philippine Development Plan. Then, okay, let's see that. So I already mentioned about I already finished 1.1. Then I also finished 1.2. I think we can proceed with 1 point. I think we are now on 1.4. Apply important laws governing natural resources and environmental protection with subnational planning. Laws like the Philippine Environmental Impact Statement System or PD 1586 ensure that all development projects comply with environmental standards. So subnational planning integrates these regulations to balance development with environmental sustainability. So if the problem is or the question is a province is planning a large-scale tourism project near a protected forest. So which legal instrument is crucial to ensuring that environmental impacts are addressed? So um, let me give you options like A, CLUP, B, um, EIS, C, Regional Development Plan, D, Zoning Ordinance. So as I just mentioned, it's the Philippine Environmental Impact Statement. So answer is EIS, letter B. Okay, because it's asking about legal instrument that's important in ensuring that environmental impacts are addressed. 1.5, assess important laws governing natural resources and environmental protection with, okay, continue with the next page, with subnational planning. Is it same with national? Is it correct? Subnational planning. 1.5.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's same subnational. So key laws such as the Philippine Clean Air Act, for example, or RA 8749, and the Clean Water Act, RA 9275, both of these laws aim to protect natural resources. So subnational governments implement these laws through local development plans and ensuring compliance with national priorities. So how can, for example, a regional development plan ensure compliance with the Clean Water Act, for example? So, if there are options like A, monitoring local pollution levels without sanctions. So this is stated in the negative. Then B, by requiring businesses to submit wastewater treatment plants. So it's stated in the positive. C, by developing infrastructure projects without environmental assessments, so negative. Then D, by limiting the use of water resource without consulting stakeholders, so it's stated in the negative. So answer is letter B, by requiring businesses to submit wastewater treatment plans. Okay, we can go to number 4, key milestones, laws, and rules and regulations on physical planning. So broken down to 2.1 to 2.5. Okay, let me start with 2.1. Explain the intent of special laws and regulations that serve as development controls at all levels of governance. So, special laws and regulations act as safeguards to ensure orderly development and maintain balance between urbanization and environmental protection. Examples include the Building Code of the Philippines, RA 6541, which provides guidelines for structural safety and zoning ordinances that define land uses. So these controls support sustainable growth, mitigating urban sprawl and environmental degradation. So if the question is, what's the primary objective of development controls in urban planning? For example, A, to facilitate unregulated urban expansion. To ensure adherence to zoning ordinances and safety standards. C, to prioritize economic growth over environmental concerns. So D, to restrict all forms of urban development. So again, test taking technique is those, if it's the question is implies negative or positive statement or positive tone, then all those negative tone here should be, or statement should be taken down or struck out or eliminated. So we have letter B, which is the most responsive question, to ensure adherence to zoning ordinance and safety standards, so stated in the positive tone. Okay. 4.2, 2.2, identify the key special laws and regulations dealing with physical planning, human settlements, the public domain, open spaces and buildings, and both the natural and built environment. So this is point 67, one item. There are some key laws, right? So the UDHA, the National Building Code. What else? The EIS, so this I also mentioned earlier. So these laws regulate land use. They also promote open spaces. They also ensure safety and sustainability of human settlements. So if the question is which law mandates the preservation of open spaces in urban development, so we can have the urban development, and we have the UDHA, or Urban Development and Housing Act, which is RA 7279. So I hope you will remember this. Then 2.3, evaluate the concept of evolution and applicability of development controls. 3.33%, 5 items. I think I already mentioned that development controls have evolved, okay, to include zoning regulations, environmental policies, and community-based planning approaches. So modern controls emphasize sustainability and climate resilience, integrating community participation and innovative technologies. So if the question is, which aspect of development control is most significant in addressing climate change? So, for example, choices like A, flexible zoning laws allowing for mixed-use developments. B, strict adherence to existing building codes. So did you see that? First is a mixed use. Second is building code. Then C, inclusion of climate risk assessment in development planning. So it's related to climate change. And then D, restricting industrial developments in urban zones. So not the answer because it's not asking about industrial development, but the aspect of development control that's most significant in addressing climate change, which is letter C, inclusion of climate risk assessment and development planning. 2.4, apply the different types of development controls in physical planning. So physical planning utilizes various development controls such as zoning ordinances, subdivision regulations, setback requirements, and more. So these tools manage land use effectively while ensuring infrastructure efficiency and public safety. So if the problem is, or the question is, a developer plans to build a residential subdivision adjacent to a wetland. So which development control should be prioritized? So I'd like to give options like A, setback requirements from the wetlands. Obviously, that's the correct answer, right? Letter B, adjustments to building height. C, allocation of parking space. But it's it does not ask that. Uh, so include letter D, inclusion of commercial areas within the subdivision. But this is a wetlands. The answer is setback requirements from the wetland, letter A. Then for 2.5, analyze the process of crafting a zoning ordinance and its many parts and special ordinances dealing with development-related matters, including development controls within both the built and natural resources or environments. So, um, in crafting a zoning ordinance, so we need to be very familiarized. We need to be familiarized on how to craft a zoning ordinance. It involves number one, reviewing existing land use and community needs. Number two, establishing zoning classifications. For example, residential, commercial, industrial, tourism, etc. Three, engaging. So this is not yet a question, but just trying to characterize or what does it involve when you craft an zoning ordinance. So number three, engaging stakeholders in public consultations. Number four, drafting provisions to include development controls for natural and built environments. And five, adopting and implementing the ordinance. So if the question is, which step in crafting a zoning ordinance, as I just mentioned, ensures that the ordinance addresses community needs. So, A, okay, drafting land use classifications. B, conducting public consultations. C, identifying penalties for zoning violations. D, enforcing zoning codes. Obviously, answer is letter B, conducting public consultations, because it's asking about which part of the zoning ordinance which ensures that that it addresses community needs. So that's through public consultation or stakeholder consultation, stakeholder engagement. Okay, so we can go to the number 5, which is key milestone laws, rules, and regulations on environment and ecology, which is equivalent to 14%, 21 items spread through the subtopics 3.1 to 3.5. Let me start with 3.1. Identify a particular action or project. Identify a particular action or project is covered by the Philippine EIA system. So it's equivalent to 4.67%, 2 items. So just to reiterate that the EIA system in the Philippines, established under PD 1586, ensures that projects likely to have significant environmental effects are identified, they're assessed and mitigated. So examples of projects requiring an ECC or the environmental compliance certificate include mining operations, major infra projects, and large-scale industrial activities, etc. So screening is crucial to determine whether a project falls within the EIA system. So if the question is, which of the following projects typically requires an ECC under the Philippine EIA system? A, home-based businesses. So there are descriptors there that indicate it's not falling under the category of those that require ECC. B, large-scale mining operations. So because of the descriptor large scale. And then local food vending stalls, so it's uh, indicating smallness because of vending stall phrase. And then D, school fund raising activities. So answer is B, large scale mining operations. 5.2. Oh, sorry. Is it 5.2? Because it jumped. Okay, 5.2. Evaluate whether a particular action or project is covered by the Philippine EIA system. Screening criteria under the EIA system determine the need for an ECC based on the project scale, location, and potential environmental impacts. For instance, a small-scale projects in environmentally critical areas such as watersheds or wetlands may still require assessment due to their location. Okay, did you get that? Um, so a question like which of the following best justifies the requirement for a small-scale project to undergo EIA screening? A, its low operational cost. B, its proximity to an environmental critical area. C, its exemption from local zoning ordinance. D, its focus on community development. So obviously it's letter B because of the location criteria. So letter B says its proximity to an environmentally critical area. So um its answer is letter B. 5.3 or 3 point, why it's saying 3 point something? Nagkamali lang, ano? So it should be 3. Apply the advantages and disadvantages of the screening process as provided in the Philippine Environmental Impact Statement system. So the screening process identifies potential environmental risks early, providing an opportunity for preventive measures. However, it can be resource intensive and lead to delays in project timelines. So projects with minimal impact may incur unnecessary costs, emphasizing the need for precise screening. So a question like a problem or a project developer wants to construct a housing development near a mangrove forest. So which advantage of EIA screening should the developer prioritize? A, streamlining construction permits. B, identifying and mitigating ecological risks. C, avoiding public consultations. D, reducing construction costs. So obviously, answer is letter B, identifying and mitigating ecological risk so that you can take advantage of the EIA screening to identify mitigating and ecological risks. Okay, so sometimes EIA screening could come in the form of just a checklist. But sometimes, yeah, it needs further process or documentation. Depends on the project itself. So 3.4, analyze the advantage or the advantages and disadvantages of the screening process as provided in the Philippine Environmental Impact Statement System. Okay. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Advantages could be it prevents environmental degradation. Okay. Second, ensures stakeholder involvement. Those are some of the advantages. How about disadvantages? So, could be could involve lengthy procedures. Uh, Also, high compliance cost. So balancing these factors is essential for promoting sustainable development. Um, so a question like, which factor represents a disadvantage of the AIA screening process for small developers? A, increase public awareness of environmental concerns. B, delays in project timelines due to compliance. C, enhance environmental protection measures. D, improve coordination with local governments. So, A, is positive. C, B also. I mean, C, enhance environmental protection measures, and then improve coordination. So, all are, yeah, demonstrates or implies positive aspects. So it is, but it's asking about which factor represents a disadvantage. So it is not asking about advantages, but disadvantages. So answer is letter B, delays and project timelines due to compliance. So 3.5, evaluate the use and function of the environmental compliance certificate. The discussion or the ECC, so I mentioned already earlier that the ECC is a document certifying that a project complies with environmental standards. Also, it ensures that proper mitigation measures are in place. So without ECC, projects cannot legally proceed. However, enforcement challenges and monitoring lapses often occur. So if the question is, what's the most critical function of an ECC in environmental planning? So let's see. A, enhancing project financing opportunities. B, serving as proof of environmental sustainability. C, ensuring that projects adhere to regulatory guidelines. And D, facilitating smoother project implementation. So all may be uh, critical, but what's the most critical, which is C, ensuring that projects adhere to regulatory guidelines. So but this is a general, so probably in your board exam, the choices should be more specific so that it will not be confusing to examinees. And then so 6, which is key milestones, laws and rules and regulations on environmental planning practice. So 6.67%, 10 items. We have the R8 and 587, also known as the Environmental Planning Act of 2013. So this act or this law governs the regulation of the practice of environmental planning in Philippines. The law defines environmental planning as a multidisciplinary profession focusing on the scientific, aesthetic, and orderly disposition of land and resources. So key provisions include the licensing of professional environmental planners and the scope of their practice. So the law emphasizes adherence to ethical standards and the promotion of sustainable development. So if this question is, which of the following best describes the primary objective of R80 and 587? So yeah, please be always um careful. You can rely on the keywords, on what it's trying to convey or what it's trying to emphasize. So which of the following best describes, okay, the primary objective of 10587A, to prioritize urban development projects over rural ones? So obviously it's not The correct answer to regulate the practice of environmental planning and ensure professional competence. So I will skip that because that's the correct answer. Letter C, to centralize planning authority under national government agencies. So we know it's not does not work like that because we have also the local government code governing the planning processes at the local government level. So letter D, to eliminate public consultations in planning processes. And letter D is supposed to be eliminated since public consultations are indeed, yeah, they are essential in the planning process. So answer is letter B, which is to regulate the practice of environmental planning and ensure professional competence because RA 10587 is yeah, is the law that regulates the practice. So we can go to um, 6 point, okay. 4.2. It should be 6.2. 3. Sorry, 3. Mali yung numbering nila, no? It should be 3 and then 4. But anyway, we'll just follow that. RA, okay, so I'm in, hmm, so that, then, okay, examine the comprehensibility of RA 10587 of 2013 in the practice of, okay. Yeah, I think that's the one that I mentioned. I already finished 4.2. We're now on 4.2. Interpret the requirements of. It's very specific, right? RA 11032 of 2018 and the practice of environmental planning. So if you have not read that, it could be very dangerous. You could lose because it comprises 4 items, 2.67%. So it is 11032 is the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act of 2018. And that aims to streamline government transactions, including those related to environmental planning. So it simplifies the approval processes for projects, including securing permits and certifications, reducing red tape, and encouraging transparency in public transportation or transactions. Sorry about that. Environmental planners must ensure compliance with these simplified processes to meet timelines while adhering to ethical standards. So, a question like an environmental planner needs to obtain multiple permits for housing project. So how can RA 11032 benefit the planner in this situation? A, by allowing the planner to bypass specific environmental requirements. B, by reducing the number of permits required for project approval. Letter C, by streamlining and expediting the process of obtaining permits. And D, by granting planners the authority to issue their own permits. So obviously, answer is by streamlining and expediting the process of obtaining permits. But this is not really a perfect question because there must be more aligned questions here, but just for the purposes of um understanding the different sections here, subtopics. Okay, so um, probably also if a question still on that subtopic, that if the question is to what extent does RE 11030 to enhance the efficiency of environmental planning processes in the Philippines? So A, it completely removes all bureaucratic challenges. B, it addresses delays by mandating clear timelines for processing applications. C, it reduces the need for environmental considerations in planning projects. D, it solely benefits private developers without impacting public planning. So again, we can apply those techniques of elimination and also the positive negative aspect that uh, in order to become responsive to the question, and we need to analyze it. Uh, so in that question, to what extent does RA 11032 enhance the efficiency of environmental planning process in the Philippines? So it's asking about the the efficiency, okay? Because enhancing efficiency means that it should address delays, or it addresses delays by mandating clear timelines for processing applications. So, okay, let's letter B of those choices that I mentioned or I just provided you. Then 4.2. Interpret the requirements of RA 11032 of 2018 in the practice of environmental planning. So I think that's the one already I mentioned. Interpreting. Okay, so it's yeah, this is very confusing because of the numbering. So letter B, okay, program, project development, management, and implementation. So we can go to principles, methods, and instrument used in the design and appraisal of project. So how many pages do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I think it's not really long. So when we interpret the theoretical concepts of those, yeah, theoretical concepts such as project evaluation and then generic knowledge and approaches applicable to all types of projects. So quite could be more examples under this. But you know, this competency focuses on understanding foundational project evaluation frameworks, including cost-benefit analysis, also log frames or the logical frameworks. Also, I'm not sure if they would be including theory of change models. So these approaches help to systematically assess a project's objectives, also deliverables and expected outcomes, ensuring alignment with strategic goals. So, when someone is asked to evaluate a water resource management project by interpreting its logical framework to ensure its feasibility and sustainability. So that's how we uh apply this theoretical concepts. Some 1.33%, two items. Um, yeah, a lot here. So if they can ask the definition of log frame, explaining its purpose in project evaluation. So you can also be asked to illustrate the steps involved in a theory of change model. Uh, in evaluating a community project. I think this is a more advanced evaluation tool. And then, yeah, you can apply logical framework to identify potential risks in a infrastructure project, for example. And you can also, it will also ask you another one in under the analyzing competency, you can be asked to compare the advantages and limitations of cost-benefit analysis in project evaluation and IRR or the yes, um You can also be asked to critique the suitability of cost effectiveness approach in assessing public housing projects, for example, and more type of questioning. So then the 1.2 there is to evaluate the various, the next page, evaluate the various economic tools in evaluating the interdisciplinary viability of government projects on both qualitative and quantitative analysis. So in those competencies like under remembering, so because there are 7 items there, 4.67%. So under the remembering competency, you can be asked to on certain economic tools commonly used in project evaluation. You can also be asked in calculating the net present value of a government project with given cash flows and a discount rate. So we have formulas on that. Also, you need to assess the strengths and weaknesses of using quantitative versus qualitative tools in project evaluation. Also, okay, let me see if there's a design. Okay, nothing about creating competencies. So I can proceed with 2.0. To evaluation methods. Okay. 2.1, so there are 9 items. 2.1 is describe the basic terminology and concepts of program or project evaluation and statistical analysis. So, hmm, hmm, like evaluation methods. So, yeah, there are evaluation methods in project planning. In which involve assessing project of effectiveness, also assessing efficiency and impact using statistical and qualitative techniques. So uh, those key terminologies include, of course, number one, project evaluation, which means a systematic process to determine the relevance, efficiency, and sustainability of a program. Then, how about statistical analysis? Um, yeah, It's it's used to collect, analyze, and interpret data. And common techniques include regression analysis, also hypothesis testing, descriptive statistics, and more. So because in this particular subtopic, it is asking to describe the basic terminology and concepts of. So it was already identified what is program, project evaluation, and statistical analysis. So another key terminology being used in evaluation in general is baseline data. So baseline or data, this is the initial data collected before project implementation to compare against future outcomes. So we call that baseline data. Indicators is also important terminology under evaluation. Indicators are the metrics used to measure performance, such as input, output, outcome, and impact indicators. So, uh, it may also ask you to compare effectiveness versus efficiency, whereby effectiveness measures the extent to which objectives are achieved, while efficiency examines the resources used relative to results achieved. So understanding these concepts ensures that uh, we are understanding these subtopics under evaluation methods. Okay. Then 2.2, apply the various types of projects or of project evaluation, design models, and their corresponding statistical concepts in the appraisal of project viability. Well, evaluation design models provide frameworks for assessing project performance, and there are models, for example, experimental designs. So, these are randomly assigned. It randomly assign projects to control and experimental groups to determine cause-effect relationships. So there are also quasi-experimental designs there's whereby lack random assignment. It involves that lack random. It lacks random assignment, but compare different groups to estimate impacts. So that's why it's called quasi. Then there are also non-experimental designs such as you're just using observational methods to assess project outcomes and many more. This is quite uncommon for environmental planners. But if you're a researcher, I think you will not have a problem answering these kind of questions. Uh, well, statistical concepts supporting the models include hypothesis testing, which determines if results are statistically significant. And then there's regression analysis also that assesses relationships between variables to predict outcomes. And then sampling techniques also is important because it ensures representativeness of data collected. So 2.3, identify the different types of indicators of results, effectiveness and efficiency, 1.33%. 2 items. So yeah, indicators provide measurable evidence of project performance, and there are common types. I mentioned input indicators, so these are when you are measuring resources that were invested, such as budget, your manpower, and then process indicators also are this tool is used to track activities and procedures such as number of training sessions conducted, etc. Then output indicators means that it measures immediate results. So what are these immediate results? Was, for example, when you held or when you conducted a training. So after attending, after the participants have attended that, so you can now measure immediate results. So, for example, if you're doing CLUP, for example, or okay, yeah, it could be difficult measuring when after the training, completion of the training session is the immediate result because the outcome, the indicator is reflective of the short to medium term changes. So it's something that you need to wait for some time before you're able to identify these short to medium term changes. Okay, like improving living conditions, etc. You cannot immediately measure that because that falls now under outcome indicators. Then impact indicators are longer because they indicate long-term effects like reducing uh poverty levels. So it will take some time. So efficient indicators are should be also okay. We need to know also or remember during your board exam that effective indicator should be SMART. It's an acronym. So uh we've learned this even in our graduate course. So it should be specific, should be measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, so that it spells out the acronym SMART. And so these ensure they align with project objectives. So um we can go to planning, administration, and professional practices. I think this is not the last one. Still long. And then last one, okay. Major public sector. Okay. Major public sector reform measures toward good governance comprising 23 items. Hmm. Then I'd like to proceed to 4.3, apply best practices in good governance and public service principles in national, regional, and local planning initiatives. 2.67% for items. So, good governance in public administration refers to the efficient and effective management of resources and public services. So there are principles of good governance. So we have principles such as transparency, accountability, participation, the rule of law, effectiveness, and efficiency. So applying these principles across planning levels ensures that plans are inclusive, equitable, what else? Sustainable, and fostering trust among stakeholders. So 4.4, identify planning and implementation structures for areas, national to local, and sectors, public, private, peoples, including indigenous communities or indigenous peoples. So, yeah, there are planning structures vary depending on the scale and sector involved. We have the national planning structures. So centralized agencies responsible for overarching frameworks and policies include the NEDA, right? So, and local government units implement area-specific projects, so that's the local planning structure. Then sectoral planning focuses on public or government, private or business, and the civil society sectors. Regarding indigenous planning structures, because these are all structures. So recognizes also this structure recognizes and incorporates indigenous systems and practices to ensure culturally sensitive and inclusive development. So this is the value why we need to incorporate the indigenous systems or indigenous systems. So under 4.5, analyze planning and implementation structures for areas. Finished. Is it finished? Oh, just a moment. Still, yeah, it looks the same, right? But not really. Analyze planning and implementation structures for areas, national, local, and sectors, public, private peoples, including indigenous, again, indigenous communities or indigenous peoples. Um, so when we analyze planning structures, it involves assessing the coordination, efficiency, and inclusiveness of various frameworks. So, how do we do that? Like, normally, there's what we call the interagency collaboration, whereby it examines or we examine how national and local entities work together. So that's what we call the interagency collaboration. So part of the of those frameworks that are important under 4.5. And then there's also the sectoral synergy that focuses on the partnerships among public, private, and people sectors. Then inclusivity of indigenous systems, whereby we need to evaluate the integration of traditional knowledge to into formal planning processes. And there are many forms in doing this. Yeah, the sometimes it's also called grassroots system, whereby yeah, local knowledge or traditional knowledge are important and the integrating and evaluate also the integration, okay, into the formal planning processes. So common issues include among those challenges, because it speaks also about challenges there. That common issues include bureaucracy. Of course, there's the challenge of limited resources and gaps in communications or communication between levels of governance. So, a robust analysis of all this ensures that gaps and inefficiencies are identified and addressed. So 4.6, identify stakeholders, their interests and influences in, okay, through to the next page, in program or area planning and implementation. So there are, okay, there are in this particular context, it is important to identify or categorize stakeholders in planning. And number one, we have primary stakeholders, and they're directly impacted by the project. Like, for example, the residents, the local businesses because of the project. Then we also have secondary stakeholders. They are those who are indirectly affected, like the regional agencies, neighboring communities, etc. Then there are also what we call influential stakeholders. They have the power to shape project outcomes, like our policymakers, the funding agencies. So effective stakeholder identification helps to align project objectives with community needs and promotes greater acceptance and success of the initiative. So 4.7 is there? 4.7, formulate area program, project planning and development organization using participatory process. 4%, 6 items. So participatory planning involves actively engaging stakeholders in the decision-making processes. So there are steps included here. Yeah, because we have stakeholders like primary, secondary, so they're always yeah, what is this? The stakeholders in planning are indeed key to the success of any plan or strategy. So there are some activities, in participatory planning. Number one, stakeholder mapping. So we're able to identify all relevant participants under stakeholder mapping activity. Then there are also some engagement strategies such as workshops, focus groups, public consultations. Also, there are also feedback mechanisms whereby we establish systems to gather and incorporate stakeholder input. Then, decision integration means using participatory insights to guide planning and implementation. And so, this approach ensures that plans are inclusive and aligned with community needs. 4.8 is evaluate human resource and organizational capability development process. Evaluating organizational capacity, such as your LGU, involves assessing number one, human resources. So under this, yeah, there's a need to assess the skills, expertise, and training of personnel. Under the assessment or under organizational processes, efficiency of systems and workflows are done. So how about resource availability? So there's a need to find out if there's adequate financial and material support in pursuance of all these developments. Leadership and management also is one capacity that should be evaluated. So like effectiveness of decision making and strategic directions, blah blah. So 4 point. So no, we're now on letter C. Okay. Mhm. This is letter C, planning administration.
2.0 Code of Ethics for Environmental Planners.
2.0. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Under Code of Ethics for Environmental Planners, I would like to proceed with 2.1, describe the ethical and disciplinary initiatives as inscribed in the Code of Ethics for Environmental Planners. So the Code of Ethics for Environmental Planners serves as a guide for professional conduct. It outlines the principles and values planners should uphold, including number one, integrity. So then second, accountability, third, public interest, and then the disciplinary mechanisms, where the violations are addressed through established legal and or professional bodies to remain or to maintain the profession's integrity. So 2.2 is interpret the responsibilities of environmental planners to the country, organization, the public, clients, and the co-professionals. So environmental planners have various responsibilities, including to the country, to the to organizations, to the public, to clients, to co-professionals. So all these were captured in that Code of Ethics. So yeah, these responsibilities uphold the credibility and effectiveness of environmental planning as a discipline. Now, we're now on the public sector. Okay, money is it? No,
3.0
point.
Scope of 3.0, ma'am. Scope of
Okay.
professional
Scope.
practice.
Okay, thank you. So under scope of professional practice for environmental planners, let me read 3.1, describe the scope of practice of environmental planners in the Philippines. So we have one item there. And 3.2, identify positions in government with environmental planning functions and the CSC prescribed qualifications for such positions. Uh, hmm. So I think that's the one. Hmm. Yeah, the scope of practice are all in RA 10587. I think I delivered a dedicated discussion on this, right? On the scope of practice. Like for example, yeah, teaching, and then when you are a government planner, so you have lots of this scope of practice, and then subdivision planning, EIA, and many more. So they're all in the in RA 10587. So then number two, based on that criteria in the civil service, so they also have the standards. They also have that CSC memo on, for example, the qualifications for MPDC, CPDC, and all planning positions in national and LGU levels. So we can go to letter D, to the next one, Jen, 1.0, government budgeting processes. So 1.1, so 6%, 9 items. For 1.1, interpret the laws that govern the use of public funds and the manner of its appropriation. Um, yeah, government budgeting is governed by specific laws that dictate the use of appropriation of public funds, and this include the Constitution, for example. So we have constitutional provisions whereby it establishes, of course, that's the foundation, right? For the guidelines for budget preparation, approval, and execution. There are also the GAA, the General Appropriations Act, that an annual legislative measure authorizing government expenditures. And then we also have executive orders and administrative guidelines that define procedures for fund disbursement and financial accountability. And there's also Freedom of Information Act, uh, that ensure public access to budget information to foster accountability. So proper interpretation of these laws ensures that public resources are utilized effectively and in line with national priorities. So for 1.2, differentiate between government expenditures and financing programs. That's very specific, right? That government expenditure means it refers to the allocation of funds for goods, services, and projects to meet public needs. So, for example, our info projects, public services like education and health, and then for financing programs, it refers to the mechanisms for raising funds to cover expenditures, including number one, taxes and revenue generation, then our borrowing through loans and bonds. Then we also have grants and foreign aid. So we need to understand all the, the difference of each of these concepts under 1.2. Then for 1.3, analyze the different types of budget, okay? Concepts such as balance, surplus, total, resource, and one fund, and their significance, and government fiscal policy. 2.67 for items. So, yeah, balanced budget. So, what do we mean balanced budget? So, we need to know also the definition. Dami nating concern, right? So, in this particular TOS, so, balanced budget means expenditures match revenues, avoiding deficits. And then, obviously, surplus means that revenues exceed expenditure, so that's about surplus budget, allowing debt repayment or savings. You can incur savings also when we are talking about surplus budget. Then deficit budget is the opposite because expenditures exceed revenues, meaning it requires borrowing. So total resource budget incorporates all available resources for comprehensive planning, for example. So one fund concept means ensures all government revenues are consolidated in a single fund for better oversight. So each concept influences fiscal stability and policy effectiveness. Then first, one point, what did I say about that? But that 1.1, 1.2, sorry. I'm now in number 2, right? Then,
Yes po.
hmm, okay, for 2.1, so 8%, 12 items. So 2.1, identify the major sources of funds to finance the national budget. So do you think you can be confident and you know already this is just one item, but we don't know which question would be asked under this, except to just follow, okay? So identification, right? So the national budget is financed through various sources of revenue, yeah, which can be broadly classified as um, number one, taxes. So and under taxes, we have several items, but generally, taxes are compulsory contributions imposed by the government on individuals and businesses. So taxes form the primary source of funding for the national budget and include income tax. So that's number one. These are levied on individual and corporate incomes. Then we also have the value added tax or the VAT. This is applied to the sale of goods and services. So excise tax also, these are imposed on specific goods and like tobacco, alcohol, fuel, etc. Then these are taxes, but there are also non-revenue taxes that forms part of the national budget. These include revenues from government-owned enterprises, regulatory fees, fines, and penalties. Examples are the dividends from government corporations. Then we also have fees for permits and licenses. Another one is borrowing. So borrowings comprise both domestic and foreign borrowings. Loans help address budget deficits or fund major projects. We also have grants and donations provided by foreign governments or international organizations. Um, Grants do not require repayment and are often used for development programs. So we really need to understand all these sources, okay, which ensures fiscal transparency and accountability in public finance management. So, um, 2.1, then 2.2 categorize um the various classifications of revenues and classes of taxes. I think, yeah, revenues can be classified based on their nature and the way they're collected. So, number one, tax revenues. They are mandatory payments. Taxes are mandatory payments made to the government, and they include number one, direct taxes, which are levied directly on individuals or entities. For example, income tax, property tax. Then there's indirect tax. It's applied to goods and services and passed on to consumers through VAT. And then there's excise taxes also as a form of indirect taxes. Then the non-revenue taxes comprise earnings not derived from taxation, such as fees for government services. And then there are also those what we call royalties from natural resource extraction. Then capital receipts, these are funds generated through these investments, loans, or other one-time transactions. these are called classifications under 2.2. Then 2.3 classify the various types of domestic and foreign public borrowings and debts and the legality and process of obtaining such borrowings. So 3.33%, 5 items. So yeah, public borrowings can be categorized based on their origin and purpose. So number one, domestic borrowings. So these are loans sourced from within the country, often through first treasury bonds and bills because they're issued by government to local investors. Then borrowings also as a form of domestic borrowings, borrowings from local banks and financial institutions like Land Bank, and then we also have DBP and other banks. Okay, so for foreign borrowings, I mentioned already about domestic. So foreign borrowings are loans sourced from international organizations or foreign governments, such as multilateral loans from institutions like the World Bank or ADB, UNDP, etc. Then we have bilateral loans from foreign governments like AusAid, and then we have the USAID, etc. We also have Spanish grants and more. So the legality of borrowings is governed by national laws such as debt ceilings and approval process. So, the next one is we're on government procurement processes. 3.1 illustrate the procurement organizational framework in the Philippines according to RA 9184. I did not mention about the new government procurement, NGP, National New Government Procurement Act, NGPA. But we can be prepared for that anyway if the IRR will come out February of 2025, then probably they can include that also. So, well, RA 9184 is still the governing, procurement process or procurement act that outlines the organizational framework for public procurement process. So, but there are some key components. Normally, questions asked here is, what do we mean by procuring entities or the PE? So procuring entities are government agencies, departments, and instrumentalities responsible for procurement. So each procuring entity or PE is required to create a BAC or the Bids and Awards Committee to oversee the procurement process. Then, so who comprises BAC? BAC composition, BAC is composed of chairperson and members from the PEs or the procuring entities, technical, administrative, and finance units. So observers also from CSOs or civil society organizations and private sectors should be part of BAC to ensure transparency. Then, a terminology like the Philippine Government Electronic Procurement Systems or PhilGEPS also. We should know the acronym and also how we define. We should also know its role and how do we define PhilGEPS. So it's an online portal for procurement notices, bids, and awards to streamline and promote transparency. Then there are also oversight and regulatory bodies under the procurement topic here. We have Government Procurement Policy Board or the GPPB. GPPB they formulate policies, issues guidelines, and monitors compliance. So for 3.2, appraise the legal and administrative environment of the Philippine public procurement process. So the legal and environment or an administrative environment of procurement under RA 9184 ensures transparency, accountability, and efficiency in using public funds. Hopefully, right? So, number one, legal base. So, what's the legal basis? Okay. So that's RA 9184. Then, what are the administrative processes? Number one, competitive bidding. So this is the preferred procurement method and that ensures fairness and competitiveness. And then there are also alternative bodies are alternative methods which form part of the administrative process, because alternative methods used in specific circumstances like direct contracting or shopping, or yeah. Then there's also compliance monitoring. So the GBPB monitors compliance and enforces sanctions for violations. Then there's a grievance committee also. This might be asked. So procuring entities must establish mechanisms for handling complaints related to procurement. So, for 3.3, apply the principles and practices of public procurement in the Philippines. 3.3 at 3.33%, 5 items. So, public in the Philippines operates on the following core principles. Number one, transparency. Then there's competitiveness, accountability, value for money, fairness. So, these are all of those. For 4.1, I think this is the last one. Okay, finally. No, 4.1. Is it correct, Jen? Okay.
Yes, ma'am, 4.1.
Okay. So identify the underlying best practices on public-private participation that can be applicable in emerging markets or developing economies, and consideration of the specific local conditions. Public-private partnerships, or the PPPs, are a collaborative mechanism between governments and private entities for delivering public infrastructure or services. So best practices for effective PPPs in emerging markets or developing economies include clear if there's clear legal frameworks, okay, like that. These clear legal frameworks should establish a robust regulatory framework to provide clear rules, process, and accountability mechanisms for PPPs. Uh, so that's the meaning of clear legal frameworks. Then, um, it should properly allocate risk between public and private entities to ensure efficiency and project sustainability. Then, there's also a need to engage stakeholders and the public to align projects with community needs and garner support. And uh, a lot, a lot more like capacity building. Okay, so there's a need to enhance institutional capacity of governments to negotiate and manage PPP projects effectively. So it's not really that easy. So project feasibility and bankability. So it means that there's a need to conduct comprehensive FS to ensure that projects are financially viable and socially beneficial. Then it should also ensure that there's transparent bidding, that it's properly maintained, and then there's monitoring and reporting processes that are effective, that are efficient. So, and lastly, it needs to leverage innovative funding mechanisms like, uh, if you're familiar with blended finance and the green bonds, also to address budgetary constraints. So this form part of the innovative financing models. Okay, 4.2 is explain the PPP scheme, the legal and regulatory framework. Yeah, all these are very challenging. So, the, okay, yeah, this PPP thing is, is quite mm, is comprehensive. So it's also yeah, you need 2 days to at least or more to know about PPP schemes. But even during the pre-pandemic, a number of questions have been asked on PPP schemes. So let's start with the build, operate, transfer, the BOT. This means the private sector builds and operates infrastructure. Okay, let's take that for an example. Then transfers ownership to the government after a specified period. Then build on operate or BOO is that how does it work? The private sector owns and operates infrastructure indefinitely. And then the joint ventures, this is where partnerships, this is a partnership where public and private sectors share resources, risk, and benefits. So these are PPP schemes and a lot more. Yeah, there are some additional modalities there for PPP. And then yeah, there are also those contract type, like they are determined by project objectives, risk appetite, and then financial viability, stakeholder interest. But examples of this contract type is they include concession agreements, lease contracts, service contracts. There may be more. So in the, uh in evaluating this PPP component, there are there are legal criteria, technical criteria, financial feasibility. So there are specific documents for each of this evaluation criteria. So, and this should align also with national development goals. So I think 4.2, I think it's all about this one. It mentioned contract type for a given project context under the Comebot Comebot law. Comebot or sorry, is comprehensive management of emerging business opportunities and technology. Quite long, right? This is the law that governs the legal and regulatory frameworks for PPPs in the Philippines. So, yeah, which means that uh, we need also to study, but it comprises like 1%, 0.67% one item, but we still need 1 point, right? To be to either to top or to pass the subject or pass the board exam. So I think we are okay for this, and that ends our discussion on the table of specifications. I already provided three TOS for all the subject areas. So thank you for that. So this is now, I need to end the lecture now on this particular TOS. Thank you.